Hello, this is Dr. Michael Arnhem. This is part 2 of the Theresa May saga. Theresa, are you watching? You never read my articles addressed to you personally. I hope at least you are watching these videos. That's my name, Dr. Michael Arnhem. You can look me up on Wikipedia under Michael Arnhem. And what I want to talk about now, Theresa, are you listening? Is your approach to terrorism. In Britain, there have been 5 terrorist outrages in 2017 alone. The one in Manchester was particularly serious. The one in Parsons Green in September 2017, fortunately, was less serious and no one was actually killed. But it's clear terrorism is a major problem. And what are you doing about it, Theresa? Well, you've got your so-called PREVENT program. What a lot of nonsense that is. What is that supposed to do? It's been going for some time, a so-called counter-radicalization program, revamped in 2011 and I think about to be revamped again, to stop people becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. It is simply naive. That's why I say you are a comedian. It's hilarious. It's not working. It could never work. Two main problems with this kind of program. One, it's a denial of freedom of speech. For you, or whoever you're using as your agents, to define extremism. People must be entitled to their own views, even if you think they're extreme. If they are actually inciting violence, yes, of course, that's a different matter. But just to try to brainwash people into your way of thinking is a denial of freedom of speech. And actually has the opposite effect. It will make people want to reject your message and to go with the opposition. And in fact, even the United Nations rapporteur, whose name is Maina Kiai, has warned that this program, PREVENT, could end up promoting extremism rather than countering it. That's from the United Nations. PREVENT could end up promoting extremism rather than countering it. So, please, don't try to do that. And then try to censor the internet as well. We cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed, is what you said. Yet, that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. So you want to corral Google, Facebook and Twitter to censor posts on their sites. And actually they have agreed to some extent. But it's nonsense, because the real terrorists are not on the ordinary internet anymore. They're on the dark web, which cannot be controlled by Google, Facebook and Twitter, and don't even register on Google. They're not on the ordinary internet. You can't look them up on Google. It's naive to think that you can drive them out of business like that. It'll only make them more secretive, that's all. And who are we talking about here? Who are these people? Who are these so-called extremists, and in particular the terrorists? Well, there was a very interesting interview done by CNN of a young Belgian called Michael Delafortrie, who has changed his name to Eunice, his first name, but his genuine name was not hidden, Michael Delafortrie. And he quite openly admitted that he had been to Syria as a member of ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, suppose calls itself Islamic State, or what the Arabs call Daesh. He had begun life in Belgium as a Catholic, brought up as a Catholic. He wasn't an Arab or of Arabic extraction. He was, if you looked at him, you'd think he was an ordinary Belgian. He started out as an altar boy in the Catholic Church, but now he scorns that and everything to do with Western civilization. He has complete contempt for it. He's a very soft-spoken young man, thoughtful, intelligent, and yet he belongs to ISIS. He compared Islam, he identified ISIS with Islam generally, which, of course, most people in the West say is wrong, and most Muslims say is wrong. But anyhow, he said that changing from Christianity to Islam was an upgrade. Just as, and he gave the parallel, if you upgrade from Windows XP to Windows 10, you won't use Windows XP if you've got Windows 10 available. That's what he said. To him, Islam was an upgrade. But not just Islam, he belongs to the most extreme type of Islam. He even named one of his sons after his hero, Osama bin Laden. And when he was questioned about his nationality, he said, "I'm not Belgian, I'm Muslim." Why can't you be both? Why can't you be a Muslim Belgian? That wasn't put to him, but he would have rejected it, because to him it's an exclusive choice. It's a rejection of everything that he found in the West. He grew up in the West. I think he's Flemish-speaking Belgian, but he's not a Belgian, according to him. Didn't stop him from going to collect 500 euros a month in welfare from the Belgian government. He was a little sheepish when he was filmed doing that. He was shown going to collect his 500 euros. And he said, well, if they want to keep me here, they've got to pay. They've got to pay me if they want to keep me here. And he was honest enough to give up his welfare once he found a job. He didn't go and collect the 500 euros anymore. Now, this young man, he was 28 at the time, has not, of course, actually been a suicide bomber as yet, but he belongs to the same type who do that. Why? It's easy enough to say, oh, these terrorists are cowardly. It's a cowardly act. Is it? It's certainly foolhardy. Throwing your life away when you've got most of it ahead of you. It's desperate. But that just shows there is something very serious driving these people. They are very seriously disaffected and desperate. Why? Well, Michael, or Eunice de la Fortry, said, Islam offered him the promise of purpose and structure, providing strict rules and moral clarity, as against the shades of grey which he found in Western values. And what is even worse, though, in Western, so-called Western values, is that what passes for Western values are not really Western values at all. Political correctness has crept in the West to the extent that it has become dominant in certain quarters. And yet these values are often referred to as fundamental shared values. They are not. Who has ever voted for political correctness? Nobody. They're not genuine. They're not natural. They're not natural. That's one of the points. Islam is much more natural. I'm not saying the extreme forms of Islam. But Islam, in general, emphasizes the natural nature of things. They draw a distinction between male and female, which modern political correctness in the West is in the process of obliterating. They recognize that people are not all the same. And although Sharia law is condemned in the West, actually in many ways it's fairer than the politically correct type of justice dispensed by the politically correct courts that we now see becoming increasingly dominant in Western countries. There is a huge amount of hypocrisy in the West. That's one of the things. Islam is not hypocritical. It says what it believes in. I'm not talking about the extremist form of Islam. But in the West, there's a huge amount of hypocrisy. And that is what Donald Trump's victory in America was against. He brought out what he called the forgotten people. As he put it, forgotten people, forgotten no more. Because these were people who rejected the political correctness that was becoming dominant, and that is increasingly dominant in the West. There's a great deal of talk about equality, liberal values, but actually political correctness is not about those things at all. Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is actually curtailed by political correctness. You daren't use certain words, you daren't say certain things, and nowadays there's even a new type of pronoun you have to use. For people who don't wish to identify as male or female, they want to be called Z or some other pronoun which they've been inventing. And in really politically correct countries like Canada, there's a professor there, for example, who's been threatened, or who is threatened with dismissal because he refuses to use these made-up pronouns. That's not freedom of speech. It's a denial of freedom of speech. In the universities in America and in Britain, these politically correct groups will not allow certain speakers to address them. And in America, there is a group called Antifa. Antifa standing for anti-fascist. Well, that sounds fine. Of course, one has to oppose fascism. But that's not actually all they do. They go much further than that. They're not a genuine liberal group at all. And interestingly enough, even Alan Dershowitz has come out against them. Alan Dershowitz, Professor Alan Dershowitz, who is a retired law professor from Harvard, who is a genuine liberal, old-fashioned type of liberal. And this is what he has said about Antifa. Antifa are the people who were tearing down statues of Confederate generals and even judges in America. He's saying to Antifa, do not glorify the violent people who are now tearing down the statues. Many of these people, not all of them, many of these people are trying to tear down America. Antifa is a radical anti-American, anti-free market, communist, socialist, hard left, censorial organization that tries to stop speakers on campuses from speaking. I'm quoting Alan Dershowitz here. They use violence, and just because they're opposed to fascism and to some of these monuments should not make them heroes of the liberals. They're not genuine liberals. That's the point that Alan Dershowitz is making. This was on the 22nd of August in an interview with Fox and Friends on Fox News. And there's an article about it in the Washington Post. Not the Washington Post, the Washington Times. The Washington Times. And that is Alan Dershowitz, a genuine liberal. That is the sort of thing that makes young people like Michael de la Fortry reject the West, because the West has been infiltrated by this kind of hypocrisy and this kind of extremism. That is extremism as well. Yes, all right, Antifa is not known to have killed anybody, but they are violent as well. They have amongst them certain violent elements, according to Alan Dershowitz. He refers to them as the violent people who are now tearing down the statues. I don't know if, as far as I'm aware, they haven't actually injured anybody, but their ideology is extremist as well. But it's not just them. The general approach of political correctness is not in keeping with genuine liberal concepts. It's hypocritical. They talk about equal rights, but actually it's more about privilege. Privilege. In Britain now, the Labour Party has got women-only shortlists for Parliament. Why? Is that about equal rights? No, it's not. It's about privilege. Even Anne Widdecombe, that very, very sensible, hard-headed, long-serving politician, put it this way. She said that the suffragettes of 100 years ago, in other words, the women who fought for equal rights for women, would have thrown themselves under the king's horse rather than to demand this kind of special privilege, because women-only shortlists is a form of special privilege. Her reference to throwing themselves under the king's horse is a genuine historical reference, because one suffragette did actually throw herself under the king's horse at the Derby and was killed. But that was in the name of genuine equal rights, not special privileges. Women-only shortlists denies equal opportunity to men who want to stand for Parliament in those constituencies, and it denies the right of the electorate to have a free vote on who they want. It's discriminatory against male candidates and the electorate. One person who recognizes the hypocrisy of all this is the black justice on the United States Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, Justice Clarence Thomas, who stuck a 15-cent discount sticker on his degree certificate from Yale, because he said that is what it's worth, because he only got into Yale because of affirmative action, because he was black. It was a special privilege. He didn't get there on merit. He got there as a privilege. Privilege and equality, privilege and rights are at opposite poles. The French Revolution was supposedly about sweeping away privilege, like, for example, the privilege of the aristocracy in not having to pay taxes. That's a privilege. It's a special right enjoyed only by the few. But equal rights is exactly the opposite. And that's why Clarence Thomas opposes affirmative action, because to him that is a form of discrimination, inverse, reverse discrimination and privilege. And another very common manifestation of that is quotas, a quota system. Because what tends to happen is you get an attempt to give people equal rights. When that doesn't quite work, then you try to push start the system by means, in America for example, by means of busing black and white children. But as, again, Clarence Thomas has pointed out, why is it that black children were considered able to learn how to read and write only if they were sitting next to a white child? Isn't that demeaning of black children? But that is what happened. For a long time in America, there was busing of children. White children into inner city schools, black children into suburban schools. And the next step after that was quotas. The American Supreme Court has said quotas are a form of discrimination, so they do allow affirmative action otherwise, but not in the form of quotas, because a quota is, again, either a positive quota or a negative quota, is a form of privilege, or, if it's a negative quota, discrimination. And there have been quotas in the universities in America which have been struck down because of that, as being discriminatory, because there was a quota of at least a minimum percentage of black students had to be admitted, or, and of course as well, negative quotas. For a long time, Harvard and other universities, the Ivy League universities, operated a negative quota system against Jewish students. Because in 1922, Harvard suddenly realized that the number of Jewish students, especially in the law school, was escalating on the basis of grades, school grades and so on. These Jewish students were becoming more and more numerous. They wanted to stop that. So they actually implemented a quota system, which was never publicized, but which was very effective for about 40 years. And now there are some cases which are on their way to the United States Supreme Court because they're saying Harvard is operating a quota system again. This time, a negative quota system against Asian students, students from China, or of Chinese, Japanese, Korean extraction, who are doing better than black students and also white students academically, but they want to keep control of those numbers. Now Harvard is denying that. It remains to be seen whether that is true or not. But if it is, then it will, of course, be a form of discrimination. This is all part of the hypocrisy that goes by the name of political correctness. Hypocrisy, unnatural values that are dominant in certain quarters, very influential quarters in the West. Is it a surprise that young people who think for themselves reject that? Of course, this applies to a lot of young people from the Middle East, but even someone like Michael de la Fortry, who is a Belgian, born and bred in Belgium, also rejects that. Yes, he has made a choice which is even worse, going with ISIS or Daesh. But one can understand why he has made that choice. And one can understand why a program like PREVENT, which is basically a brainwashing program, is never going to work on these people. What is the answer? The answer is to stop this hypocrisy. Political correctness is hypocrisy. It's not genuine liberalism. It's not genuine freedom. Stop it. That, and bring back genuine Western values. That's what Donald Trump is all about. That is why he was elected President of America. People came out of the woodwork to support him who did not accept all this political correctness. That is what is needed. Without that, terrorism will undoubtedly keep on attracting young people in greater and greater numbers. A program like PREVENT is not the answer. I hope you're still watching, THERESA.